There comes a moment when all the world holds its breath. The moon bleeds red, darkness contorts, and whispers a long-forgotten stir beneath the night. This is the dark hour, a time when light shudders and fate calls out from the void. Come closer, because once you step through, there is no escape. Welcome to the Dark Hour Pan. Chapter 4, Memories of Ash. Every night in Grolnok's command tent at Borgo Pass, Transylvania, the dream always began with a symphony. Not one of brass horns or war drums, but the symphony of a place one calls home. It was the murmur of the stream flowing over moss-covered stones, the whisper of the wind through the old pine ridges, the steady rhythm of the hammer from the village forge, and above all, the clear laughter of children playing on the green. His village was nestled on the mountainside, peaceful and proud. The pine log roofs were covered in a green patina of time, and smoke from the hearths curled lazily into the evening sky, carrying the scent of freshly baked bread and hot stew. Here, every person was a part of the tribe, and the tribe was one large family, and Grolnok was the heart of that family. In the dream, he was not a tyrant. He was a man, a father, a chieftain. When he walked through the village, the children would stop their games to cheer his name. The blacksmiths would look up and nod with respect, and the women would smile with reassurance. His strength was not for sowing fear, but for sheltering their shared home, as steadfast as an ancient oak shielding the forest from wind and rain. He was sitting on the steps of his log house, feeling the warmth of the evening sun on his shoulders and the rough texture of the wood in his hand. The small knife in his hand moved skillfully, transforming the lifeless piece of wood into the shape of a small wolf. The sound of his son's laughter echoed from the yard, as clear as a bell. He was not alone, never alone. Runa, his wife, stepped out of the house, bringing with her the aroma of simmering stew and fresh bread. Her auburn hair was neatly braided, a few strands straying in the wind, and her amber eyes looked at him with affection. Then, "Come here, son. Your father has something for you." Then his 8-year-old son stopped swinging his wooden sword and ran over. "Father, is it done?" The boy looked at the wooden wolf, his dark eyes shining brightly. Grolnok smiled, an act that now felt foreign to his facial muscles. He handed the wooden wolf to Fen. "Here you are, little warrior." Happiness. It tasted like Runa's stew, sounded like Fen's laughter, and felt like the warm sunlight of that day. Whoosh! That sound. It was always that sound. The sound of a fire arrow embedding itself in the wooden roof. The scent of pine wood and hearth smoke was replaced by the acrid smell of burning flesh, the cloying stench of blood, and the clang of metal on metal. The village alarm bell rang in desperate peals. He roared, a sound no longer human, and burst out of the house. Fire. Fire was consuming his village. Men with faces of iron and soulless eyes were slaughtering his friends, his neighbors. "Kill all the monsters," a commander shouted. "Burn this nest of heathens to the ground." He found Runa. She was trying to get Fen into the forest, but 3 soldiers blocked their path. "Get out of the way!" Runa screamed, her eyes blazing a wild yellow, her nails elongating into sharp claws. Grolnak saw the silver spear. He saw it slice mercilessly through the air and plunge into his wife. Her warm smile vanished, replaced by a grimace of pain. He saw his son, Fen, who in his fear and rage could no longer hold his human form. The boy transformed, a small black wolf cub lunging to bite a soldier's leg. And then a silver sword swung, a cold arc in the firelight. The pure light in his son's eyes was extinguished. Grolnak's world shattered. Grolnak shot upright, his hands trembling. A growl caught in his throat. His claws scraped against the armrest of the bone chair, leaving 5 deep gouges. The air in the command tent was frigid. He could still smell the stench of burning somewhere, or perhaps it was only in his mind. A blood wolf entered, immediately dropping to one knee upon seeing his master's murderous aura. "My lord, the soldiers to the west have attacked, just as you predicted." Grolnak did not answer. Kale had given him power, but Kale could not give him back the scent of pine wood. "Good," he growled, his voice like 2 grinding stones. He stood, his colossal form casting a shadow that swallowed the entire tent. "And," he commanded, "inform Varg. I hear there are women and children in that convoy. If they are captured, do not kill them. Bring them to me." He wanted to look them in the eyes. He wanted them to see the image of the husbands and fathers they were about to lose reflected in the eyes of the monster that was once a man. Inside the encirclement at Borgo Pass. The cold of Transylvania seemed capable of freezing the very soul. But Tomas, a young soldier, felt something colder than the wind whistling through the crevices of rock. It was the silence, a heavy, oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional dry cough of a child or the stifled sob of a mother. He and the remaining soldiers were taking cover behind a makeshift barrier of overturned wagons. But they weren't just protecting sacks of pure silver. They were protecting what was left of an entire community. Huddled in the spaces under the wagons were women, the elderly, and children, their faces smudged with dirt, their eyes wide with fear. Tomas glanced at a young woman named Hannah, who was clutching her young daughter, her other hand covering the child's mouth to stifle her cries. The little girl trembled, whether from cold or fear, it was hard to tell. They had been residents of the southern fortress before it fell. Now they were refugees. "Captain," Tomas whispered, his voice trembling, "did we do the right thing, leading them all into this?" The captain, a man whose beard and hair had turned the color of salt and pepper, didn't need to press his ear to the ground to know the answer. He looked into Tomas's eyes, then towards the huddled families. "Silverstone Fortress has fallen," he said, his voice hoarse. Every other road was blocked. This pass, though a death trap, was the only way. The only path to the Black Forest, our last hope. "They are the families of the blacksmiths, the farmers who will build our new settlement," he continued, his voice like an oath. This shipment isn't just silver, it's the future. Our duty is to get that future to its destination, no matter the cost. Tomas nodded, the doubt in his heart replaced by a bitter resolve. He looked at the child in Hannah's arms, then out at the dark, looming cliffs. The wind howling through Borgo Pass sounded like a hungry beast licking its lips. He felt as if hundreds of unseen eyes were watching them from the darkness, patient like predators waiting for their prey to exhaust itself. And this time, the prey wasn't just soldiers like him. The prey included children who hadn't yet learned to speak. In the distance, the howls of wolves rose in waves. The storm of claws. The silence of Borgo Pass was torn apart not by a roar, but by a scream. A watchman on top of a wagon suddenly pointed to the cliffs, his eyes wide with terror, but his warning was swallowed by his own shriek as a massive dark shape leaped down from above, taking his body and a shower of blood with it. That was the signal. From the cliffs, from the dark crevices, dozens, then hundreds of glowing red eyes ignited. The blood wolves didn't attack like an army. They poured down like an avalanche, a storm of claws and fangs, moving with inhuman speed. "Shield wall!" the captain roared, his voice lost in a chorus of growls and screams. The remaining soldiers hastily formed a defensive circle around the cowering families. Silver spears pointed outwards, but against an enemy as fast as the wind and as strong as a bear, the barrier was fragile. A blood wolf charged, using its own body to knock 3 soldiers aside. Its jaws clamped onto one man's shoulder and twisted violently. The sound of snapping bone was sickeningly loud. Trembling, Tomas thrust his spear into the side of another, but it only roared in fury, swatting the spear away with one hand and raking a deep gash across his chest. Tomas fell backward, his chest burning. He saw the monster, his own blood dripping from its claws, turning its gaze towards Hannah and her little girl. Hope was gone. They were going to die here. Whoosh! A sharp hiss, like the crack of a whip. A silvery streak tore through the air. The blood wolf lunging at Hannah stopped short. A choked cry caught in its throat. A silver whip had wrapped tightly around its neck, and the small blades on it dug deep into its flesh, smoke sizzling from the wounds. In a lightning-fast motion, Ilara yanked the whip. The monster's head was snapped back at an unnatural angle. She landed as lightly as a leaf, her cold eyes sweeping across the battlefield. At the same time, another dark figure descended from the opposite side. It was Pan. He landed more heavily, but with immense power. The Asterin blade in his hand didn't reflect the light, but seemed to absorb it. A blood wolf charged, and Pan instinctively raised his sword to block. The impact was so strong it numbed his arm, but he didn't back down. The fear inside him was replaced by a hot rush of adrenaline. This was it. This was a real fight. Grow! Laya, the white wolf, leaped into the fray like an avenging god. She wasn't as large as the blood wolves, but she was faster and smarter. She dodged a pounce, ducked underneath, and tore at the tendon of one's leg, bringing it crashing down. Their sudden appearance had made the blood wolves hesitate for a fraction of a second. The captain, though wounded, seized the opportunity. "Reinforcements! Fight!" he roared, his voice filled with renewed hope. The soldiers, pulled back from despair, found their courage. They tightened their formation alongside Alara. Pan faced his first blood wolf. It snarled, saliva dripping from its fangs. Pan swallowed hard, his heart pounding. Lyra had said, "Fight as yourself." Who was he? A human? A wolf? The blood wolf lunged. Pan didn't block. He sidestepped, a movement he had practiced 1,000 times. But this time, it was driven by instinct. He felt time slow down. He saw his enemy's opening, and he swung. The black blade of Asterin cut a sweet arc, slicing deep into the blood wolf's side. Black blood spurted. The beast let out a pained howl, looking back at him with disbelief in its eyes, before collapsing to the ground. Pan stood panting, staring at the first enemy he had ever killed. There was no sense of glory, only the stench of blood and the trembling in his hands. He had taken a life. But he had no time to think. 2 more snarled and charged toward him. The fight for survival in Borgo Pass had only just truly begun. Of course, here is the English translation of the text you provided with no changes to its meaning or content. Inside Grolnok's command tent, Grolnok was sitting in the darkness, listening. He didn't need to go out there. The screams of humans, the snarls of his pack, the clash of metal, it all reached his ears like a familiar symphony. He closed his eyes, savoring every note of destruction, imagining the scene in Borgo Canyon. Desperate soldiers, wailing women, and the panic of children, just like that day. A twisted sense of satisfaction was swelling in his chest. But then, there was a discordant sound. The whistle of a weapon he had never heard before, and the shriek of pain from one of his blood wolf warriors, a shriek too short, cut off abruptly. Grolnok's eyes flew open. At that moment, a blood wolf scout burst into the tent, tattered and panting. One of its arms was deeply slashed, black blood oozing out. "My lord," it stammered, someone is interfering." Grolnok slowly rose to his feet, his shadow engulfing the entire tent. "Speak." His voice was just one word, but it was as heavy as a boulder. 2 of them. They came from the eastern cliff face, a woman and a kid. Grolnok snorted in contempt. 2 of them? You and a pack of blood wolves were stopped by a woman and a kid? "She's fast," the scout hastily explained. "She uses a silver whip. It's like a living snake. And the kid, he carries a black sword. And beside him is a white wolf of the old order." The names Silver Whip and white wolf made Grolnok pause. Memories of old tales, of Morwyn's warnings came back to him. "Griffin guard," he growled, the contempt in his eyes replaced by a deep-seated hatred. Those ancient pests. He strode forward, grabbed the scout by the throat, and lifted it off the ground. "The kid. Tell me about him." He's young, but he killed Gorguff," the scout whimpered, its feet kicking wildly in the air. He carries the scent of Alric, that half-breed stench." Grolnok threw the soldier aside like a rag doll. He understood now. The half-breed son, the one Kyle and Varg were always hunting. He had walked right into the trap. His plan had just changed. This massacre was no longer a simple act of revenge. It had become a hunt. Grolnok's fury did not erupt into a roar, but was compressed into a cold malevolence. He overturned the heavy wooden table in front of him, maps and wine flasks scattering everywhere. "Give the order to all," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the canyon, drowning out the sounds of slaughter. "Withdraw! Form a wider perimeter!" His subordinates outside were surprised, but did not dare to disobey. Grolnok turned back to look at the scout trembling on the ground. "Go find Varg. Tell him the prey he seeks is here." He stepped to the entrance of the tent, looking towards the battlefield, where the fighting had momentarily subsided. "And order the archers on the cliffs," he said, a cruel smile forming on his lips. "I don't need those commoners alive anymore. Shoot them all down, but leave the Griffin woman and the half-breed kid." He took a deep breath, savoring the cold air of the hunt. "I want them to witness their last hope being crushed with their own eyes, and then bring them to me." Rain of accursed arrows. The battle subsided as quickly as it began. The Blood Wolves, after taking a few unexpected losses, let out a unified roar before retreating, melting back into the shadows of the rock crevices in an organized fashion. Silence returned, but now it was thick with the smell of blood and the moans of the wounded. They've retreated," Tomas stammered, his hands still trembling as the captain bandaged the scratch on his chest. "That was just the first wave," the captain said, but a sense of relief shone in his eyes. He looked towards Ilara and Pan, who were standing and catching their breath. "We owe you our lives. If it weren't for you two." Ilara didn't answer. She was looking up at the cliffs, her hawk-like eyes narrowed. "This retreat is too orderly," she whispered, her voice full of suspicion. "They don't seem like a pack of wild beasts that have been driven off." Pan stood beside her, trying to calm his breathing. He looked down at the sword Astrian. Its black blade was still pristine, not a single drop of blood clinging to it, as if it had drunk the blood of its enemy. His hands had stopped shaking, but the image of the blood wolf falling to his strike kept replaying in his mind. It was the first life he had taken. The feeling was terrifyingly empty. Suddenly, Ilara placed a hand on his shoulder. "Be careful." And then they saw it. Atop both cliffs, torches suddenly flared to light, hundreds of them, illuminating the ranks of dark figures standing there. archers, so many archers. They stood as still as demonic statues, drawing their bows, their arrows aimed straight down at their weak defensive circle. They were standing in a valley of death. The captain's look of relief froze into a mask of horror. "No," he whispered, "this is a trap." "Damn it," Ilara roared, realizing her mistake. They had been herded into a perfect trap. But they had no time for regret. A savage horn blast sounded from Grolnok's command tent, echoing throughout the canyon. And then a sound began. A terrifying whistling sound, like a swarm of giant locusts taking flight. "Arrows! Arrows!" the captain screamed, his voice breaking with despair. "Take cover!" But there was nowhere to hide. The first rain of arrows fell. They didn't target the soldiers holding shields. They targeted the center of the circle, where the women and children were huddled. Pan heard a dry thud next to him. He turned. Hana, the young mother, had collapsed. 3 arrows were embedded deep in her back. But even in death, her arms were still wrapped tightly around her little daughter, shielding her from the deadly rain. The baby's cry was drowned out by the screams of others. The second rain of arrows fell, ruthless and precise. This was not a battle. It was an execution. "Pan, move!" Ilara shouted, her silver whip lashing through the air, miraculously deflecting a few arrows. She pointed to a large crevice at the foot of the cliff, a dark cave mouth. "That's our only chance." A captain started yelling orders, shaking the survivors to their feet. "To the cave! Run!" But that distance was a living hell. Pan snapped out of his shock. He saw Tomas, the young soldier, trying to pull the little girl from her dead mother's arms. Another volley of arrows was on its way. Without thinking, Pan lunged forward. He didn't use a shield. He used the sword Asterion itself, holding it horizontally over his and Tomas's heads, and used his own body to shield them both. Clang! Clang! 2 arrows ricocheted off the black blade. Another grazed his shoulder, leaving a burning gash. The pain made him grit his teeth, but he didn't fall. "Go!" Pan roared, his voice now carrying a feral undertone. Tomas, with tears in his eyes, scooped up the baby and dashed towards the cave entrance. Pan and Ilara fought as they fell back, trying to create a fragile wall to cover the chaotic retreat. The rain of arrows was relentless, and every silenced scream behind them was a knife stab to Pan's heart. He understood. This was not a war for territory. This was a war between life and a bottomless cruelty. And he, somehow, was standing right in the middle of it. The melody of gray stone. The entrance to the cave was only a few dozen steps away, but it felt like it was on the other side of hell. The rain of arrows did not let up. The last of the soldiers had formed a makeshift shield wall, using their own bodies to shield the civilians making a desperate run for it. The dry thump of arrows embedding into wooden shields and flesh sounded continuously. The captain let out one final roar and collapsed. A black arrow lodged deep in his throat. The shield wall crumbled. The chaos turned into a massacre. Tomas, his chest still bleeding, had managed to get the child close to the cave. But when he looked back, he saw a horrific sight. Another volley of arrows was being knocked, this time aimed straight at the last of the people, with no one left to shield them. "No!" Pan screamed. He saw an old woman trip and fall. He saw a young soldier with an arrow through his leg. He saw the cruelty, the senselessness, and the helplessness. The pain of losing Irene, the burden of his parents, and the rage at this scene, it all converged. Something inside him broke. His scream was no longer that of a teenager. It was a roar, an inhuman, resounding roar that didn't come from his throat, but seemed to emanate from his very chest, from his very blood. It carried the power of a wolf and the anguish of a man. Gra-om! The roar created a tangible shockwave. The air vibrated. The arrows flying through the air were suddenly knocked off course. Chapter 5. The Stream of Light. The darkness in the tunnel was thick and silent, disturbed only by the faint blue light from Ilar's stone and the heavy breathing of those who had just escaped death's door. Silas stood in a dark corner, apart. He did not look at the soldiers, not at Ilara or Pan. His gray eyes were fixed on Tomas. No, not on the young soldier, but on the little girl sleeping in his arms, her face still streaked with dried tears. A child, amidst the ashes of war. The image was a knife twisting deep into an old scar that never healed. Memories flooded back, uninvited. The stream of light. This place had no sunlight, yet it was not dark. The light emanated from the water of the underground stream itself, a soft silver glow, and from the clusters of bioluminescent moss on the walls of the giant cavern. The air here was pure, and the silence was almost absolute, broken only by the trickling of water and the clear notes of a lyre. Silas, younger then, was sitting on a stone slab, plucking a peaceful melody. Around him were his brothers, the keepers of the source. There were not many of them, just over a dozen, the last members of an ancient secret order. They were his family. But then that peace was shattered. Darkness poured in. A pack of blood wolves, led by a young wolf with eyes burning with fanaticism, had found the entrance. They said nothing. Their target was the stream. Silas and his brothers fought. They were not warriors, but they were steadfast guardians. The sound of Silas's lyre shifted from melodious to jarring, trying to disorient the wolves. But they were too many, too brutal. His last memory was the image of his old elder falling, his blood staining the silver waters of the stream red. He saw the young leader of the wolves smile a savage grin before ordering his minions to destroy everything. Silas had survived, but he had failed. His order was disbanded. The source had been defiled. His oath was shattered into 1,000 pieces. The heavy silence in the tunnel was torn apart by a cry. The little girl in Tomas's arms suddenly stirred, her eyes flying open in the darkness. She didn't whimper, but let out a shriek, a scream full of the panic of a child who had just wakened from a nightmare, only to find herself in a worse one. "Mommy! Mommy!" Her small cry echoed off the stone walls, sounding 10 times louder. Tomas, startled, awkwardly tried to soothe her. "Shh, be good, it's okay." But his words were lost in her crying. "We have to silence her," Ilara hissed, her voice as taut as a bowstring. She started to step forward, but Silas raised a hand, the gesture stopping her. To everyone's surprise, the taciturn man slowly unslung the old lyre from his back. He sat down on a rocky outcrop without a word and placed his calloused fingers on the strings. He began to play. It was not a lullaby. The melody that rang out was the same thorny, mournful music they had heard in Borgo's Gorge. It was a lament of the stream, the gray stone and the moss, a sad story of what had been forgotten. But something strange happened. The child, upon hearing the melody, slowly stopped crying. Her tear-filled eyes widened, staring at Silas's silhouette. It seemed the ancient sorrow in the music was greater than her own fear. The melody didn't chase the sadness away, but seemed to embrace it, to comfort it, and to say, "I understand. I too have been broken like you." The entire group stood still, listening. Ilara lowered her weapon, and Pan looked at the mysterious man with a new understanding. He realized this lyre was not just a weapon. It was the last fragment of a soul. When the crying had completely subsided, leaving only soft sobs, Silas stopped playing. He didn't look at the child, nor at anyone else. He simply stood up and slung the lyre back onto his back. "Let's keep moving," he said, his voice as hoarse as before. "The darkness waits for no one." But something had changed. He was no longer a complete stranger. Between them, in the darkness of the earth, a connection had just been forged by a sad melody. Ilara stepped forward. "We owe you our lives. Who are you?" Silas looked at her, his eyes a still lake, hiding a deep sorrow. He had failed to protect his sacred place, but perhaps he could still protect these souls. A belated atonement. "I am a broken oath," he said, his voice hoarse, "and I am the only one who still remembers the path to a place that once was home." Ilara nodded, accepting that answer, at least for now. There was no more time for questions. Silas turned, raising his torch. "Stay close. Don't touch the walls. And above all," he paused, turning his head to look directly at Pan, "don't believe what your eyes see in this darkness." He started to move, and the group hurried to follow. The journey underground was unlike anything Pan had ever experienced. The air was thick, carrying the smell of damp earth, mildew, and something else, a distant, foul stench. The passage was narrow, slippery, and their shadows danced on the stone walls like damned ghosts. After about an hour of walking, Silas suddenly raised his hand, signaling for everyone to stop. The group immediately fell into a ready stance. "What is it?" Ilara whispered. Silas didn't answer. He pointed at something on the stone floor. In the torchlight, they saw scratches, very large. Scratches made by claws that no bear or wolf could possess. They were carved deep into the hard rock as if it were clay. "This place is occupied," Silas said, his voice low and warning. And then, from the darkness ahead, a sound echoed back. A scraping, creaking sound, and then the wet, wheezing breath of something very, very large. Ilara raised her silver whip, ready. Tomas trembled, shielding the child. Pan gripped the hilt of his sword, Asterion, his heart pounding. He was about to charge, but a calloused hand, hard as stone, had placed itself on his shoulder, holding him back. It was Silas. "Your sword is useless here, boy," Silas said softly, his voice almost a whisper in Pan's ear. "Use something else." "Something else?" Pan frowned, not understanding. "Close your eyes." Pan was surprised, but there was an authority in Silas's bliss that made him obey. He slowly closed his eyes. Darkness enveloped him. The monster's wheezing breath seemed to grow louder. "Ilara taught you to fight like a soldier," Silas whispered. "I will teach you to hunt like a wolf. The blood in you isn't just for strength. It gives you senses. Now forget your eyes. Use your nose. Use your ears. Listen, smell, and tell me, what is our enemy?" Pan took a deep breath. At first, he only felt the damp earth, but he tried to focus, to push aside all thoughts and let his instincts rise. And then it came. His ears heard more than just the wheezing. He heard the sound of hard chitin scraping against stone, the sound of many small feet moving with a rustling sound. His nose smelled the foul odor, but beneath that was a pungent, acid-like smell, the scent of a predatory insect. It has no fur," Pan whispered, his eyes still closed. "It has a hard shell, like a giant spider. And it's not alone. There are smaller ones." Silas said nothing, but the hand on Pan's shoulder squeezed gently, a silent nod. Pan opened his eyes. He looked into the darkness ahead with a completely different gaze. He was no longer afraid. He knew what he was facing. The Silent One's first lesson had begun. Silas's nod was the only confirmation Pan needed. He signaled for the group to slow down, the torch lowered closer to the ground. They cautiously advanced into the large space ahead. When the torchlight cast further, it didn't just illuminate an empty cave. It illuminated a nightmare. The entire cavern was covered by something that wasn't spiderweb. It was thicker, an opaque, bone-white color, and it glistened sickly in the torchlight. These bone webs stretched from floor to ceiling, forming distorted pillars and ghastly white curtains. And entangled within them were bodies. No, not quite bodies. They were statues. Statues of white bone. A giant cave bear frozen mid-roar. Several goblins hung upside down, their bodies already transformed into a milky white substance. And, most horrifyingly, in the very center of the cave was the figure of a man in iron armor, his hand still raising his sword, his face a mask of eternal terror. My God, Tomas whispered, hand covering his mouth to stifle a gag. Don't let that thing touch you, Silas hissed, his bow already drawn. It will turn your flesh to stone. And then the master of this place appeared. From the cavern ceiling, it slowly descended, not on a thread, but on 8 long, razor-sharp legs. The Bone Weaver. It had no fur, only a outside Borgo's Gorge. The smell of blood and ash hung heavy in the cold air. Gronach stood on a rocky outcrop, looking down at the results of the order he had given. Dozens of bodies of soldiers and civilians lay scattered amidst the shattered carts, their bodies riddled with black arrows. A victory, but in his eyes, this was a failure. The main prey had escaped. They disappeared here, my lord. A blood wolf pointed to the smooth cliff face. There's not a single trace. Gronach growled, a sound that made his subordinate tremble. He leaped down from the outcrop, the ground shaking slightly. He pressed his giant hand against the rock face. Cold, lifeless. Cunning little rats, he hissed. Do they think they can hide underground? He turned back. Bring Caelthus here. Another blood wolf, skinnier, with a long snout and stark white eyes, stepped out from the shadows. He was a tracker, one whose sense of smell had been enhanced by Morwen with dark magic. He could smell a drop of dried blood from a mile away, or even the lingering scent of fear in the air. Caelthus knelt, pressing his nose to the ground near the cliff. He took a long, deep breath. I smell cold stone, the fear of humans, he whispered, and the scent of a stranger, the smell of green moss, decaying leaves, and stillness. He was here for a very long time. He looked up, his white eyes meeting Gronach's. The passage is behind that boulder, but it has been sealed from the inside. An ancient magic conceals it. Gronach let out a cruel smile. Ancient magic? Good. He looked up at the towering peaks of the Carpathian Mountains. This mountain cannot hide them forever. It must have another way out. Spread out, scour every cave, every crevice within a 10-mile radius. I want every exit guarded. When they crawl out of their hole, I want to be the first one to greet them. Deep inside the mountain, a temporary shelter. A flickering fire chased away the cold and darkness in a small, relatively dry cave that Silas had led them to. After the battle with the Bone Weaver, they had walked for another 2 hours in silence before Silas declared this place safe enough to rest. The tension in the air had eased, but it remained heavy. Ilara was sitting and cleaning each blade on her silver whip, her eyes still vigilant. Tomas had managed to get the little girl to sleep. He laid her down on an old cloak, then sat beside her, his sword always within reach. He had named the little girl Lena after his sister back home. Pan said nothing. He sat at a distance from the fire, the sword Asterion laid across his lap. He was carefully wiping the thick green blood of the monsters from its blade. The image of the soldier being turned to stone and shattering replayed over and over in his mind. Death was no longer a distant concept. It was right here, cold and tangible. Suddenly, he felt a gentle tug on his shirt. It was Lena. She had woken up and had quietly come to sit beside him. She didn't say anything, just opened her wide eyes, looking at his black sword, and then back at him. Han froze. He looked at her, then at the sword, a deadly weapon. He hastily sheathed it. He didn't want her to see it. He offered her his last piece of dried jerky. Lena hesitated for a moment before taking it. The two children, one big and one small, simply sat next to each other in silence, sharing a piece of bread and an unnameable loss. On the other side of the fire, Ilara looked at Silas. Bone weavers? I thought they only existed in legends. Down here in the earth, all legends are true, Silas replied, his voice hoarse. He was plucking a few stray notes on his lyre. You are used to fighting wolves, but down here, there are things that are older, hungrier. They don't care about Kyle or humankind. They only care about pulling everything into the dark. You seem to know a lot about them, Ilara said, her tone probing. Silas stopped playing. I have lived here long enough to know that to survive, you must learn to respect the darkness, not fight it. He gazed into the fire. Get some rest. We will need our strength. The road to the stream of light is long, and what we just encountered was merely a greeting. The silver stream. How long they had been walking, no one knew. Time was a meaningless concept deep in the earth, measured by burnt-out torches and an exhaustion that seeped deep into their bones. Their food was gone, and the survivors' hope was as fragile as the last flickering flame of the torch Silas was holding. The tunnel before them now sloped down dangerously, and the air grew cold and stifling. How much further? Tomas whispered, his voice raspy. He was practically carrying Lena, who was too exhausted to walk on her own. Silas didn't turn back. When you can smell life, he answered, then we have arrived. Han didn't understand what he meant. Everything here smelled only of cold stone and decay. But then he was the first to sense it. A faint breeze, very faint, wafted from a crevice ahead, and it carried a scent he no longer clearly remembered. The smell of wet grass after a rain, the smell of fresh air. There, Han pointed, his voice filled with amazement. Ahead, a sliver of silver blue light was seeping from a narrow crack in the rock. That's it, Silas said, and for the first time, a hint of emotion flickered in his voice. The stream of light. They used their last bit of strength, squeezed through the narrow crack, and stepped inside, and all of them stood stunned, forgetting to breathe. They were standing in a colossal cavern, as large as a great hall. But there were no stone pillars or statues. This place was a forgotten garden. The light did not come from above, but everything emitted it. A stream meandered through the center of the cavern, its water emitting a soft silver light that illuminated every pebble at its bottom. Clusters of moss on the rock walls and giant mushrooms also radiated a mystical green glow. The air here was pure and cool, and the only sound was the gentle trickling of water, a melody of eternal peace. The surviving soldiers dropped their weapons and collapsed, a few bursting into tears of relief. Tomas gently set Lena down by the stream's edge. The little girl, for the first time in days, smiled, cupping the glowing water in her hands. Ilara stood still, the silver whip in her hand seeming to vibrate with the pure magic of the place. She let out a long breath, releasing the burden of the entire journey. Only Silas showed no sign of relief. Pan looked at him. The grizzled hunter was standing by the stream's edge, staring intently into the water. The silver light from the stream cast upon his face, and Pan could see the profound pain in his gray eyes. He was looking at his home, but it was a home that was broken. "It has been tainted," Silas said quietly, but in the silence of the cavern, everyone heard it. Pan walked to his side and followed his gaze. He saw it. Though the water still glowed, right in the middle of where the spring bubbled up, there was a dull, dark gray streak, like an unhealed scar that was slowly spreading. "The dark magic of the blood wolves," Silas said, his voice bitter. "They couldn't destroy it, but they wounded it. The light is fading. So is the magical protection that conceals this place from the outside world. We are safe, but not forever." He turned to look at Pan, his gaze intense. "I could not protect it. My power is that of the green forest and the gray stone. I cannot heal a magical wound." Silas was silent for a moment, then continued, his voice no longer that of a guide, but of someone betting his final hope. "But you are different, boy of the House of Minos. Within you is your mother's light and your father's wild strength. Light and life. Perhaps I did not bring you here just to hide." He pointed to the dark scar in the heart of the stream. "I cannot heal it," Silas said, "but perhaps you can." And so our chapter for today comes to a close. The firelight has faded, and the sounds of the deep earth have returned to their natural silence, leaving us to ponder the perilous journey that lies ahead for Pan and his companions. The Dark Hour Pan wishes to extend its sincerest thanks to you for spending your precious time with us, for holding your breath as you followed every footstep, for living through the heart-stopping moments of tension and the rare, fleeting moments of peace. Your presence in every chapter is the warmest flame, an invaluable source of motivation for us to continue telling this story. The world of Blood Moon still holds countless mysteries yet to be unveiled, and even greater dangers lie waiting in the shadows. If you feel the pull of this adventure and wish to be a part of the journey, please don't hesitate to hit the subscribe button. Every single subscription is like lighting a torch, illuminating the path ahead and ensuring you will be the first to know what happens next. And if you feel the story deserves to be heard by more people, please help us by sharing this video with your friends and fellow enthusiasts. Every share is a signal, an invitation sent out to other kindred spirits, so that the Dark Hour Pan community can grow stronger with each passing day as we explore the darkest corners of this tale together. Where will the road ahead take us? Will Pan master the power within him? And what enemies await them at the end of the tunnel? All will be revealed soon. Once again, thank you so much for your support. We wish you meaningful moments of rest and peaceful dreams before we once again face the darkness together in the next chapter. Take care, and until next time.